The second point regarding our breaking into the big game is that we have to organize as teams very differently. And first, it means that our understanding of what makes up our community is much broader than it originally was. So it's not just the fellows or a fellowship, but it's a community of a global community of everyone a Changemaker co-leaders. This means obviously that the fellows remain as a very central role, the most important role, in fact, but it's not limited to the fellows. So it also now includes, besides us, as Ashoka staff, the staff, our fellows, and also their staff in some cases where their organizations are co-leaders, which is the case of Alana Institute here in Brazil. But also in countries that have done the selection of Changemaker schools later on, and where they've managed to select schools, just very few, where the leaders are truly committed beyond their schools and are playing at the big game level, also the leaders of Changemaker schools. Partner organizations and resource partner organizations that are very important in the fields and that play a role in this architecture for young people and for children, and also what we call mavens, so kind of writers, influential writers that are picking up the stories, also creatives. So for instance, YouTubers that are very, very active and have strong followership. So these types of actors. And now with Ashoka Young Changemakers, the Ashoka Young Changemakers are also a very critical and important part of this community. So as the AYCers start being elected to our community, they start composing this group and being a key element of this co-lead community. So then what Ashoka does is not kind of manage a project or a program, but engage and cultivate relationships between these members, these co-leaders in this community, but especially between them and other teams inside the Jiu-Jitsu partners. So our role is twofold, right? We need to make sure that this community is strong and that they're connected and that they're driven by this vision of everyone a Changemaker, that they can see that this is their opportunity to play big. But we also need them to be able to activate and to build synapses with their counterparts, their teams also in the Jiu-Jitsu partner organizations. And this means that we have to make decisions about who we're going to work with, which is also very different. So I think we sometimes make the mistakes, and we made that mistake also in the beginning, of focusing, for instance, on the fellows that are very important, they're the most important co-leaders, the ones that were working and are working with education or children or young, or youth. And it's a very logical thing to do, and I'm not saying we don't have amazing co-leader fellows that are, whose field of work is education, childhood, or youth, but just having these fellows is not enough, because it's not so much about a community that is focused on a single topic or that have their own concern in a specific field, but more the ones that are committed to that vision and will contribute to that vision of everyone a Changemaker, irrespective of their fields of work. And so the other attribute is not just the field, but their modes of operation, their strategies, and how they do and they go about their work. So to compare, for instance, with the fellow profile that we're all familiar with, it's almost as if, what I'm trying to say is that it's looking less at the new idea section and looking more at the strategy section. Because sometimes you will have a fellow that is not engaged in education and engaged in a very different field, but is really a master in engaging unions. And if they've figured out how to work with unions, how to bridge, social entrepreneurship field and the union architecture in very creative and productive ways, we need them, because we need them to help us engage with the unions of education professionals. So then it's not about the field, and it's much more about their mode of action, the way in which they do things, and their how-tos. So that, I think, was an important insight as well. And the other important insight is that this is a small community, if you think about Brazil, the size of Brazil, more than 210 million people. We have 250,000 schools. So we're talking about a big ecosystem. Yet this co-lead community is made up of roughly 50 people. And so 50 people is manageable. It also means that we're able to make it strong and to cultivate these relationships. And it's not about working with large groups of people and kind of organizing big talks and that kind of work, because it's not really how this kind of these changes and this revolution takes place. And the second thing is also that we need to make it a group that is diverse enough, in the sense that they're committed to this vision and they want to play big, and not necessarily they're trying to put forward a specific agenda around a given line of action of education or a pedagogy A or B, right? And that, I think, is very important as well. And then by finding and cultivating teams in the jiu-jitsu partners, we do it in a very similar way. The difference is that we don't know them as well as we know our fellows, and now Ashoka Young Changemakers and other partners and our schools. So we don't know them as well, so we need to rely on the people that we start connecting with in these jiu-jitsu partners to help us find other of their team members. So this means that we have to ask them. It's quite natural to see the folks that are truly interested, and when you have a conversation and you see that they get it and that they're and they feel compelled to be part of this. But then you have to ask other questions, like who are the people that you trust the most, or who are, a question we usually ask to go beyond this first individual or two people in the team is to ask them, when you have a crazy idea and you want to do something big, something that is kind of against the grain, who do you rely on in your team? Who are the people that you can trust and that will be just as crazy as you to want to do it? And usually that's how we find these other people, and we start engaging them, just inviting them to the conversations. And I think that the bottom line of kind of the question of how do we engage them and we build this relationship is we simply treat them like we treat our fellows. So if we treat everybody that is in our co-lead community and the teams of the jiu-jitsu partners the way we treat our fellows, and we expect, they expect to be treated, and we treat them, that in itself will go a long way, because it means that we will treat them like peers, we will treat them like innovators in their own right, and like people that are trying to bring about very important systemic change. And it also means that they will feel that they're treated as peers, and that is critical for them to feel part of this group, and in order for them to work together. Finally, there's an element of that team building, which is that to create opportunities, the best way to engage is to create opportunity for them to be able to play big. So it's not because they are big and they are from jiu-jitsu partners that they necessarily have always the opportunity to do this. So first, what we have is the ability to create opportunity for them to do that. So an example is when we work with the Secretary of Education in Bahia, and we help the team, the jiu-jitsu team, organize what we call Changemaker Journeys, adapting from the Changemaker Journey with ASN, but for them to work with school principals, pedagogical coordinators in all 27 districts of the state of Bahia. We're talking about almost 5 million students. So when we did that, our purpose was not to train them, but our purpose was to help them as a team, as a jiu-jitsu team, be in a position of leadership where they themselves were offering an opportunity and an experience for their expanded teams to play big, to learn and to play big. So it probably had a training or a kind of a learning element for them, but it was not our ultimate purpose. Our ultimate purpose was to create that platform for them to have a more leadership role, and by playing that leading role, they also see themselves as big and willing to contribute to that movement. So this is an example of these types of opportunities to help them play big. and they will in turn also create these opportunities for us and for our community to also play big. So it's a two-way process. You get as much as you give, and but we need to be the ones giving, kind of extending our arms first and making sure that they see ourselves as strong enough to partner with them. And the last word about this team element, which is also very important, is that we don't want the teams to be working alone. We don't want to have a strong team in a union that is just strong in that union. We want them to be able to connect with the teams from the other jiu-jitsu classes and of course with the core co-lead community. So these lateral connections between different categories of jiu-jitsus and more so all the different directions of connection, so it's more like an omnidirectional system, is critical for this to work. So I think it's also a mistake we made at some point in kind of specializing and saying, so you will be kind of focused just on unions and you will be focused just on government jiu-jitsu, because it's really more about building a kind of a network and a system where they're all interconnected. So this kind of omnidirectional nature is very important, and of course the global nature of our community is also very important.